The journal lay open on my desk, its leather cover cracked from decades of handling. I'd inherited it along with the cabins when Grandpa Elias passed in 1984, leaving me, Alexander Thompson, as the sole caretaker of Shadow Ridge Retreat in the dense forests of Quebec's Laurentian Mountains. The year was 1992, and the place was a cluster of log cabins nestled near Mont Tremblant, a spot Americans flocked to for that authentic Canadian wilderness experience. Grandpa had built the first cabin in 1925, expanding over the years as tourists discovered the area. But he always said the land wasn't truly ours. It belonged to something older. My days were routine. Maintenance, bookings, and the rules. 6 laminated cards now, up from Grandpa's original 4. I'd added 2 after my first encounter in '89. They were straightforward, designed not to alarm, but to protect. The phone in the office rang, breaking the silence of the foggy afternoon. New reservation. The Whitaker family from Chicago. Parents David and Karen, kids Sophie, 17, and Ben, 15. Arriving tomorrow for a 10-day stay in Cabin 3. Americans, seeking escape from city life, probably inspired by tales of pristine lakes and hiking trails that I loaded the truck with supplies. Clean bedding, a new chain for the door, firewood stacked high, and the cards. The drive up the narrow dirt road took 25 minutes, the engine straining against the steep grade. Fog clung to the birch trees like spider webs, and the air carried the scent of wet moss and distant rain. Grandpa's pocket watch, engraved with his initials, read 2:30 p.m. as I pulled up to Cabin 3. Daylight was plentiful, but September days shortened fast here. Fresh moose tracks crossed the porch, imprinted deep in the soft earth from last night's drizzle. Large bull, from the stride. I traced them to the back, where they'd crushed some wildflowers Karen Whitaker would likely admire. The bathroom window latch was loose, bent inward as if pushed from outside, though no storms had hit. I noted it for repair and pushed the door open, the hinges creaking in protest. Inside, I followed the ritual, rule card on the kitchen counter, leaning against the percolator where the parents would spot it first, another on the hall table, one in each bedroom on the bedside lamps. The teens might crumple them, but I'd done my duty. I filled the wood bin, tested the propane stove, checked the smoke alarm. Practical measures that saved lives, unlike the last 3 rules, which guarded against something else entirely. You couldn't print, "Don't invite the guardian of these woods inside, or it'll claim what it wants." Bad for business. On the porch, I almost overlooked them. For parallel scores in the banister, slicing through the weatherproof coating to pale wood. Each groove about 9 inches, spaced oddly, like a hand with elongated fingers. Too intentional for a bear's scratch, too sharp for branches. Bears clawed raggedly. This was carved out. I knelt, fingering one cut. Edges precise, no fraying. Fresh, perhaps 2 days. I pulled my camera, snapping shots from different angles to capture the depth. Grandpa had drawn identical marks in his journal, always September, prelude to the first hard freeze. He'd hunted patterns, solstices, temperature shifts, bird flights. Nothing stuck. The marks arrived unbidden. Right before the valley turned interesting that I left my card on the counter, number bolded. Landlines were reliable, but storms could knock them out. If the Whitakers needed me, they'd figure it out. The return drive was eerily quiet. No squirrels scampering, no ravens cawing. Wind absent. Such stillness signaled change, weather or otherwise. I'd stopped speculating. My phone rang as I reached my cabin. Text. No, in '92 it was calls. David Whitaker, inquiring about ski trails, off-season, but he meant hiking. I paused in the truck, considering. Safe paths. The Riverbend Loop, easy, picturesque. Or the authentic ones, where the mountains revealed why First Nations revered them. I chose compromise, Summit View Trail, moderate, panoramic. Watch for evening chills, drops 15 degrees post-sunset. Omitted the part about the trail skirting the abandoned mine where American tourist Maria Lopez heard her father's voice in '87, luring her toward the shaft. In my cabin, I warmed leftover stew and opened the journal. Grandpa's script was firm in the early pages, shaky later. September 1947 entry stood out. Visitor at cabin 3. The Johnsons from New York knocked at 1 a.m. Courteous man outside said he was disoriented. Johnsons nearly let him in, but recalled the rules. He named them all, including the cat's pet name. Knocked till dawn. Tracks and mourn. Hoofed, not caribou. The line that lingered. It knew our regrets before we confessed them. I rinsed the pot. The Whitakers would arrive tomorrow, likely mid-morning if they drove through Montreal traffic. They'd mock some rules, obey others, peg me as eccentric but benign. Teens griping about no TV. Parents enamored with the vista. If fortunate, that's it. Photos, tales of the odd Quebecois host. If not, rules existed for that. I secured the deadbolt, chain, window latches. Grandpa obsessed over portals, doors, windows, even the flu. After seeing it 2 winters past, in a miner's overalls from the 1930s Depression era, politely begging entry from the blizzard, I got why. Motion light activated outside. Likely a fox. Usually was. I doused the kitchen light, left the porch illuminated, and bedded down. Tomorrow loomed long. Chapter 2. The guests. The Whitakers' minivan arrived at 11 a.m. Illinois plates gleaming under patchy sun. David Whitaker exited first, energetic despite the drive, surveying the property like appraising stock. 40s, fit, probably in finance from the firm grip. Alexander Thompson? David. This is paradise. Karen followed, genuine smile reaching her eyes, teacher vibes. Sophie, 17, emerged sulking, Walkman blasting grunge. Ben, 15, bounded out, backpack slung, eyeing the woods. Welcome to Shadow Ridge, I said, aiding with luggage over David's objections. Americans, courteous yet self-reliant. Inside, they admired the coziness, the fieldstone hearth, plaid throws. The rule card drew David's notice. Detailed list. Never answer knocks after midnight. He jested, but I stayed steady. Wildlife, wanderers. Nights turned tricky. Karen nodded, educator's practicality. Logical. With children. Ben at the window. Awesome. Like a monster movie. I outlined the generator, would supply, radio for emergencies. Clinic in Mont Tremblant. 20 minutes, good weather. As I departed, David patted my back. Thanks, Alex. We're set. Their chuckles faded as I drove. Optimistic Yanks. Forest would challenge. Afternoon call, David on trails. I recommended Summit View, added storm cautions. Didn't note the mine where voices echoed lost loved ones. Evening, stew heating, journal out. 1965 entry. Tall figure at cabin 3. American vacationers, the bakers from Boston. Scratching at 2 a.m. voice suave, requested shelter. Knew their anniversaries. Hoof prints dawn. I locked up, wind moaning. The Whitakers unpacked, hiked lightly. Sophie whined bugs. Ben gathered sticks against rules. Karen locked doors early. David grilled, smoke mingling fog. Night descended, moon veiled. At 9 p.m., cries, drawn, sorrowful, nearly vocal. Wolves, David queried. Karen chilled, like a woman weeping. Chapter 3. Omens dawn unveiled scratches on porch tree. For lines, level with eyes, resin dripping. Beaver? Ben asked. David frowned. Consult Alex. I arrived, fog dissipating. Likely lynx, I fibbed. Spacing echoed banister marks. I'll bait traps. Sophie displayed photo. Eyes during hike. Amber, elevated. Cougar. Feasible, I said. Group up. They trekked again, pathbound. Ben discovered cave, etchings within. Ancient code, he later shared. I concealed worry. Grandpa illustrated alike. For lines crossing, indigenous cautions from the Algonquin. Evening call. Cries nearer. I ascended. Family porch bound. Taut. Woods mute. Unnaturally. Ceased your arrival, Karen said. Door scratches fresh. For lines. Bear, I mumbled. Sophie murmured. Trailed us. Eyes synced movement. Instinct pressed warn, but excess honesty spurred prior guests to flee nocturnally. Worse fate. Abundant fauna, I stated. Gave spare lantern, generator reminder. Descending, halted at ancient graveyard, 1920s plot. Grandpa's marker bore 4 lines overhead, manifested post-interment. Portent or assertion. Sun dipped orange, vowing tempest. Chapter 4. The call rest elusive. 1:58 a.m. Ring. David. Rapping door. Blood iced. Ignore. Pants donned. Shotgun grasped. Truck ignited. Beams cleaving mist. Speaking. David hushed. Voice background. David Whitaker. Aid adrift. Exact. No inflection gaps. No words. I commanded. Corners sharp. Senses us. David said. Raps. 4 timed. Lights visible. Assist compatriot. Shriek. Sophie's. Eyes. Distorted. Rear chamber. I directed. Gouging walls. Tracing steps. Roof treads. Unfeasible slope. Overhead. Arrived. Porch vacant. Door etched for scratches. Prints. Toe human. Heel bifurcated. Encircled thrice. Wrapped for swift. Signal. David unbolted. Visage pallid. Karen knife wielding. Kids clustered. Departed. I affirmed. Lingered till Aurora. Weapon poised. David what? Unknown. Antique. Coffee 3 a.m. Prince non-human. Nearly he uttered. Recur. Perhaps. Dawn. Avians chorused. Omitted claiming loops. Chapter 5. Uncovering Unum. Study. Journal splayed. Discovered 1912 snippet. Prospector Laurentians reports lofty outsider door. For scores left. Hoof impressions. Ring David. Packing. Departing. Halt. Flight offends. 30 minutes. Pleaded. Arrived journal. Cuttings. Dates. 1928, 1954, 1979, September perpetual. Karen perused. Essays deference. Sophie. Cave glyphs. Identical 4 lines. Snaps aligned. Bolting viewed disrespectful. Explicated. Clan 68 bolted. Vehicle deserted road. Doors ajar. Vacant. They remained. Fortified. Trial. Ben said. Woodland phantoms lore. Secured dwelling. Beds relocated. I stationed concealed. Observing. 12:03. Shape materialized. Lofty. Branched outline. Stood hours. Evaporated shadow. Prints. For rings. Constricting. Sensed it. Asserting us. Karen said. Freeze predicted. Chapter 6. Intensification hoarfrost premature. Returned midnight. Towering. Branched. Draped ragged pelts. Karen Whitaker. Ingress weary. New minutiae. David's vocation. Ben's concealed comics. Door fractured shove. Advanced. Venerate woodland. Era. Wardenship. Transients we. Intruders land never possessed. Paused. Sketched 4 lines ether. Permissible. Presently. Retreated. Vanished. Chapter 7. Grotto impelled curiosity. Grotto trek. Glyphs narrated. Aboriginals tendering horned entity. Gaining safeguard. Then colonists rupturing covenants. Pacts obliterated. I whispered. Sophie contacted carving. Heated. Gale unnatural. Cabin return. Novel gouges awaited. Chicago kin call. Secure remain. Security waned. Chapter 8. Clash snow commenced 7 p.m. Seasonal debut. Dwelling bash shunned. Kin within. I united. Shotgun set. Strides ring 9. Then raps. Voice melodious. Sophie Whitaker. Harbor storm caught. Door imploded thrust. Timber rending. Forward stepped. Honor forest. Antiquity. Protection. Visitors fleeting. Adhere codes. Halted. For lines air drawn. Adequate. Now. Reversed. Dissolved mist. Chapter 9. Exit dawn packed, land thanked vocal. Departed, gale approved. Pursue, nay bound. Ben number gave, history later. Grotto venture, glyphs packed showed, tributes safety. Shifted dread settlers forgot. Breeze replied words, solitary score porch. Rule 8 appended, gratitude departing. Chapter 10, Heritage Solitary, inscribed occurrences journal. Lone mark porch, cognizance. Woodland persisted, pacts endured, now. Fresh reservation, Americans anew. Rotation persisted. Laurentians vigilant, primeval, tolerant. Covenants tenuous, yet sustained. Presently. Conclusion as I sat on the porch of my cabin that crisp morning after the Whitakers' departure, the Laurentian Mountains stretched out before me like ancient sentinels, their peaks dusted with the remnants of the early frost that had ushered in the entity's most aggressive manifestation. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of pine resin and damp earth, a reminder that the land here in Quebec's wild heart never truly slept. It merely waited. My hands, still calloused from reinforcing the cabin doors the night before, clutched a mug of black coffee, steam rising in lazy curls that dissipated into the fog lingering in the valley below. The single mark etched into the porch railing caught the first rays of sunlight, casting a long shadow that seemed to point accusingly toward the forest. It wasn't a threat, not like the 4 parallel lines that had appeared throughout the ordeal. No, this felt like an acknowledgement, a subtle nod from whatever force guarded these woods. The old agreements, as the creature had phrased it in that melodious, unnerving voice, held. For now that I watched the Whitakers' minivan disappear around the bend in the dirt road, its taillights flickering like distant fireflies before being swallowed by the trees. David had lowered the window one last time, his face a mask of forced normalcy, and called out, "Take care, Alex. And thanks for everything." Karen had waved, her teacher's composure cracking just enough to reveal the exhaustion beneath. Sophie and Ben, the kids, had been quieter, their teenage bravado stripped away by the nights of terror. Sophie had pressed her phone number into my hand. Back in '92, it was a scrap of paper with digits scrawled in pen, saying, "When we're ready, tell us more." The history, the agreements, all of it. Ben had nodded solemnly, his collection of forbidden sticks and rocks left behind as per the rules. They'd thanked the forest aloud, a simple ritual I'd suggested based on Grandpa's notes, their voices carrying a mix of skepticism and genuine reverence. As they drove off, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves, almost like a sigh of approval from the mountains themselves. But now, alone with the silence, the weight of what had transpired settled over me like a heavy blanket. The events with the Whitakers weren't just another entry in the journal. They felt like a turning point, a revelation that peeled back layers of mystery my family had been accumulating since the early 1900s. Grandpa Elias had started the cabins as a way to make a living after the Great Depression hit hard in 1932, buying cheap land from loggers who'd abandoned the area after strange incidents drove them out. He'd heard the stories from the Algonquin elders, tales of a guardian spirit, a being that protected the sacred groves but demanded respect in return. Back then, in the 1930s, the agreements were fresh in memory. Offerings of tobacco or carved totems left at certain trees, whispers of gratitude before felling timber. But as more settlers came, Americans fleeing economic woes or seeking adventure, those pacts frayed. Grandpa documented the first major incident in 1937, a family from Detroit in Cabin 1, who ignored the knocks and survived, but left with marks on their car that looked like claw prints from a hand with too many fingers. I rose from the chair, the wooden slats creaking under my weight, and headed inside to the study. The room was a time capsule, walls lined with shelves of old maps, faded photographs, and stacks of newspapers from the 1900s onward. The journal sat open where I'd left it, my own handwriting fresh on the page detailing the Whitakers' encounter. I added more now, the pen scratching against the paper as I recounted every detail. The howls that sounded like weeping women, the eyes glowing amber in the underbrush, the precise knocks, for each time, like a code, and the creature's appearance in the snow. 8 feet tall, perhaps more, with antlers branching like a crown of twisted bone, heavy enough to bow any normal neck. Its body shrouded in what might have been fur pelts from a bygone era, rotted and hanging like moss from ancient trees. The face. Oh, that face, stretched taut over an elongated skull, human features distorted, eyes set too far apart, reflecting light like a wolf's, but with an intelligence that pierced the soul, a mouth that parted to reveal rows of serrated teeth, not for tearing flesh, but for something more ritualistic, perhaps devouring secrets or fears. The voice haunted me most. Melodious, like an opera singer reciting lines from a forgotten play, each word perfectly enunciated without the natural hitches of breath or emotion. Sophie Whitaker, Harbor the Storm Caught. It knew things no stranger could. David's hidden doubts about his finance career, Karen's unspoken grief over a miscarried child years ago, Ben's secret collection of comic books stashed under his bed back in Chicago, and me, Alexander Elias Thompson, heir to fractured vows, reader of incomplete chronicles. My middle name, Elias, after Grandpa, wasn't in any records up here. Yet it knew. As I wrote, I wondered if the entity drew from the land itself, absorbing memories like roots pulling water from soil. Finishing the entry, I closed the journal and leaned back, staring at the ceiling beams he'd hewn himself in 1945 after the war. The 1940s had seen a surge of American visitors, GIs on leave or families escaping the rationing back home. Grandpa's notes from 1947 detailed a similar event. A couple from New York in cabin 3, hearing knocks during a September blizzard. The voice claimed to be a lost soldier, knew their wedding date and the name of their unborn child. They barred the door, survived, but the wife miscarried days later, blaming the curse of the marks. For lines appeared on their window pane, etched as if by diamond. Grandpa consulted Algonquin shamans, who spoke of the Wendigo-like guardian, not the cannibal spirit of lore, but a protector twisted by disrespect. The agreements dated to the 1700s, when French fur trappers first struck deals with indigenous tribes. Respect the land, offer tributes, and the spirit would ward off harsher dangers like avalanches or rival clans. But by the 1900s, with railroads bringing more outsiders, the pacts eroded. In 1905, the journal referenced a newspaper clipping Grandpa had pasted in. Mysterious disappearance in Laurentians. American prospector vanishes after strange visitation. Josiah Hale from Pennsylvania reported a tall figure at his camp, polite but insistent, leaving 4 marks on his tent. He opened the door. His partners found only his boots, arranged in a circle. The pattern repeated through the decades. 1928, a logging crew from Michigan ignored the rules. One man lured out by a voice mimicking his brother. 1954, tourists from California in cabin 2. Marks on their car leading to a breakdown on the road at night. Vehicle found empty. 1979, a family from Texas, much like the Whitakers, who fled prematurely and were never seen again. Their station wagon abandoned with doors wide open, for lines scratched into the hood. The 1980s brought more Americans, drawn by the ski boom in Mont Tremblant, but the entity seemed more active, perhaps sensing the encroachment of development. My own first brush in 1989, a solo hiker from Seattle knocked at my door during a frost, but it wasn't him. It was the thing, wearing his face, his voice pleading for warmth. I didn't open, thanks to the rules, but the marks circled my cabin for weeks. Now, with the Whitakers, it felt personal, as if the creature tested not just them but me. The latest Thompson to hold the line. I stood, pacing the study, my boots thudding on the worn floorboards. The cave the kids had found, that was key. The glyphs weren't just art, they were a chronicle. Human figures approaching the horned being with outstretched hands, offering beads or herbs. The entity accepting, extending protection symbolized by a shield of intertwined lines. Then later panels showed discord, settlers with axes, chopping sacred trees without tribute, the horned figure's form growing darker, antlers sharpening. The final etching, faded but clear, depicted the guardian standing vigil over sleeping natives while storms raged, but in the next, it loomed over fleeing whites, mouths open in silent screams. Protection turned to predation when the balance broke that I'd photographed it all, multiple angles, and now I considered sending them to the anthropology department at McGill University in Montreal. A professor there, Dr. Elise Moreau, specialized in indigenous Quebecois lore. Grandpa had corresponded with her predecessor in the 1960s, sharing sketches but withholding the supernatural bits to avoid ridicule. Perhaps it was time to share more. But what if it drew attention? Tourists already strained the land. Academics might bring excavators, disrupting the fragile peace. The phone rang, jolting me from reverie. It was David Whitaker, calling from a payphone in Mont-Tremblant. "Alex, we made it down the mountain fine. No issues." His voice was steady, but I heard the undercurrent of relief. "The kids are shaken, but Karen's holding us together. She says we should talk about it, process it." I nodded, though he couldn't see. "Smart. And the thank you to the forest?" "Yeah, we did." Felt silly, but right. We chatted briefly. Their drive back to Chicago, plans to stop in Ottawa for a breather. Sophie wanted books on Algonquin myths. Ben drew sketches of the creature. "If it comes back in dreams," David said quietly, "what then?" "It stays here," I assured. "Tied to the land. But if it does, call me." Hanging up, I felt a pang of connection. The Whitakers weren't just guests. They'd become part of the legacy, survivors who understood the rule's weight. Americans, with their can-do spirit, often dismissed the old ways, but this family had learned respect the hard way. It reminded me of the 1950s influx, post-war optimism bringing families like the Millers from Ohio in 1952. Grandpa's entry, they mocked the rules, fed wildlife, took souvenirs from the cave. The entity came 3 nights, mimicking their son's voice lost in Korea. They fled, car crashing into a ravine. Official reports said fog, but marks on the wreckage told otherwise. Lunch was simple: bread, cheese, apples from the orchard Grandpa planted in 1935. As I ate, I flipped through more clippings. The 1910s saw World War I refugees, some American deserters hiding in the mountains. One group in 1917 opened the door to a fellow Yank begging entry. Only echoes remained by morning. The 1960s hippie era brought free spirits from San Francisco, ignoring boundaries, leading to disappearances blamed on getting lost. The 1970s oil crisis drove budget travelers. A group from Detroit in 1973 survived by barricading, but one teen wandered out, lured by a voice promising peace, found days later, babbling about the Horned Watcher. The 1980s and early 90s, with economic booms, saw luxury seekers, but the entity didn't discriminate. My mind wandered to what changed the agreements. From the glyphs, it started with colonization in the 1600s, French and British trappers making initial pacts with Algonquin for safe passage. By 1800, as logging boomed, tributes lessened. The 1900 turning point, a massive clear-cut in 1902 for railroad ties, sacred groves felled without ceremony. That's when the marks first appeared in records. A trapper's diary from 1903 describing the polite devil at his door. Afternoon light filtered through the windows, casting golden hues on the maps. I decided to hike to the cave again, equipped with lantern, camera, notebook. The trail was overgrown, roots tripping like warnings. Fog thickened, but I knew the path. Inside, the air was cool, musty, echoes of dripping water. The symbols seemed sharper, as if the entity's visit had invigorated them. I traced one, for lines forming a diamond, symbol of balance. Philosophers might call it animism, the land alive, demanding reciprocity. Ecologists would see it as metaphor for environmental respect. But for me, it was literal. Ignore the rules, pay the price. Hours passed sketching, photographing. Emerging, dusk approached. Back home, I developed the films in my darkroom, a hobby from the 80s. Images revealed details missed, tiny figures in the glyphs showing offerings, food, tools, even blood drops. Protection in return, bountiful hunts, safe births. When broken, the horned one turned judge. Dinner, venison stew, harvested respectfully with thanks to the forest. As night fell, the feeling of being watched returned, not hostile, but appraising. I spoke aloud. The Whitakers left with respect. We honor the old ways. Wind gusted, rattling shutters, then stilled. Acknowledgement. Weeks later, a letter from Sophie. Read about Wendigo myths. Is it that? I replied, sharing sanitized history. They visited in '93, but that's another tale.